Hi guys, it's Angie with Fun Endeavors Tie-Dye Lab. Today let's make a Hemostat Sunflower dress. The dress that I'm using is one of the tiered Old Navy dresses, and this one is a midi length. So it's a little bit longer than the other dresses that I've been doing recently. I'm going to put the sunflower on the middle tier, and I'm only going to put the sunflower on the front part of the dress. So using a washable marker, I'm going to make a couple of marks just to give myself some guidelines for when I fold the mandala portion. I'm sticking one hand in between the two layers of fabric and making a fold on one of these lines. I'm folding the line in half, but I only want the front layer of fabric. So that's why I stuck my hand in between the two layers of fabric to make sure I was only grabbing the front layer of fabric. I don't have a lot of space to work with, so it's going to be a little challenging to keep this area flat. To do the Hemostat Sunflower, you basically fold the fold just like you were doing a mandala. So that's what I'm going to do with this dress. I'm going to fold both sides of the dress up to that line that I drew on initially. Now I'm going to pinch the seam and fold this part in half. The pockets are sewn onto this dress where they're tacked to the dress, so that's kind of throwing me off a little bit. I keep feeling that extra piece of fabric and not knowing exactly what that is, but that's the pocket on the dress. Now I'm going to make a fold on each side one more time. Essentially, this is going to end up folding an 8-point mandala. From here, I could either add hemostats and just make a hemostat mandala, or I could tie it with sinew, make just any kind of mandala that I wanted. In a few minutes, I'm going to add some hemostats and make it into a sunflower though. But for now, I am going to add some plastic clothespins because I want to hold all the folds in place, but I want to tie the rest of the shirt before I do the sunflower portion. So I'm going to add a whole lot of these clothespins because I really want to make sure I don't mess up my mandala. For the rest of the dress, I want to just randomly tie it with sinew. I'm kind of unfolding it a little bit just so that it's not perfect. Then I'm going to start wrapping random sinew lines around the dress. I'm pulling the sinew tight, but this is a pretty thick fold. I mean, there's a lot of fabric that are in some of these areas. So some of the sinew lines are going to be tighter than others, and some are going to have a lot of fabric underneath them. Like I said, I want just a little bit of definition in this area, but I don't really want to design per se in the rest of the dress. I want the main focus to be the sunflower and the rest of the dress to just have a few sinew lines in it, just to add a little bit of, I don't know, interest, definition, design. Okay, so now I'm ready to tie the sunflower. The first thing that I'm going to do is take off a few of the clothespins toward the end of the mandala, and I'm going to draw a line where I'd like for the center of the sunflower to be. Remember, sunflowers have really large centers, so I want to make the center of this sunflower oversized. I'm going to tie the center of the sunflower with sinew. On the line that I just drew, I'm going to do a straight line going across with sinew, and that's going to be the outer portion of the center of the sunflower. Then going out toward the middle of the center of the sunflower, I am going to do or tie the lines diagonally. And then once I get out toward the very end or the middle of the sunflower, I'm going to reverse it and start tying the sinew lines going back the other direction. If I went ahead and cut off the sinew right at the very end or the center of the sunflower, I would run a little bit more of a risk of the sinew coming unraveled, just because it doesn't seem to want to hold very well when it gets down to where there's not a whole lot of fabric. Of course, I'm not going to do like a reverse dye process or anything like that on this like sunflower, so it would probably be okay, but I just prefer to take it back to the main line before I cut the sinew off. To make the petal part of the sunflower, I'm going to use some curved hemostats, and I'm only going to need 4. But most of the time I use the smaller hemostats for a sunflower. I think these are about 7.5 or 8 inches long, but you can use larger ones if that's all you have. It doesn't matter. By the way, I've coated my hemostats in heat shrink tubing. I purchased the heat shrink tubing at Lowe's or Home Depot. They both sell it, and it's in the electrical department. I put a little piece of the heat shrink tubing over the teeth of the hemostats and then used a heat gun to shrink it down to fit. This will keep the teeth of the hemostats from damaging the fabric. I'm placing the hemostats touching each other in the middle with the curved side down. That'll form one row of petals. For the second row, I ended up going with a pair of 10-inch hemostats. I'm going to apply them the same way that I did the first row of hemostats. Okay, so I'm going to do a combination of liquid and ice dye for this dress. I'm going to liquid dye the sunflower portion of the dress, and I'm going to ice dye the main bulk of the dress. So for the center of the sunflower, I'm using rustic brown from Dye Spin, and I'm slowly adding it to this area and allowing the dye to soak in. I've placed the sunflower portion of the dress on top of a metal rack, which I have over the top of a plastic dishpan, which I purchased from the Dollar Tree dollar store. This is going to help keep all the colors from the sunflower from getting on the main bulk of the dress. Then right outside the very first row of hemostats, I'm going to place a very small line of Old Gold from Dye Spin. That's going to help give a little bit of definition to the petals of the sunflower. I'm going to do the same thing with the second row of hemostats. By the way, I've placed my dye down inside of some very small needle tip containers. I think these are about 1 ounce. I have links down below for where I purchased these. They're great for smaller projects like this, and they give me a little bit more control over where the dye goes. Then for the actual petal of the sunflower, I'm using Zesty Yellow from Dye Spin. On the area outside of the sunflower, I'm going to add a little bit of Bluebird from Dharma. Now I'm going to gently turn the dress over and repeat the same process on the back side. By the way, this dress had been sitting in my dye space for a couple of days, so it's almost totally dry. For the rest of the dress, I'm going to add some ice to the very top of the fabric. And I'm starting with my bagged ice, but I don't have a whole lot of that left. So I'm going to end up using some really large chunks of ice that I've made to use for gravity dyes. Over the top of the ice, I'm going to randomly sprinkle some blue linen from Dye Spin and a little bit of bluebird from Dharma. Now I'm going to add an additional sprinkle of soda ash over the top, and then I'm just going to leave this alone and allow it to process for about 24 hours after the ice melts. And I think it's going to take a while because this is some pretty big ice. I took the dress to my utility sink and I started rinsing it in cold water to rinse out the soda ash. Until I rinse in cold for a while, I want to try to keep the sunflower portion of the dress away from all of the blue that's getting rinsed out of the dress. Once I have the soda ash out of the dress, I'm not as concerned about letting the two kind of hang out close to each other, but for right now, I want to make sure that I don't get a whole lot of the blue onto my yellow sunflower. After rinsing in cold for a while, I took off the hemostats and I untied the sinew from the center of the sunflower. I also untied the sinew from the rest of the dress and warmed the water up to hot and continued rinsing to rinse out any of the excess dye that didn't bond with the fabric. I had a lot of blue coming out of the dress, so I went ahead and ran some really hot water in my utility sink, added a little bit of Blue Dawn dish detergent to the water, and allowed the dress to soak. I kept changing out the water when it cooled off and continued the soaking process until the water was almost clear. Then I put the dress, along with some Dharma's Professional Textile Detergent, into my washing machine and washed it using a hot water cycle. Then after the dress was washed and dried, this is what it looks like. Okay, so what do you guys think? So I think that the dress turned out really pretty, but I do think that my second row of sunflower petals got eaten up by the blue. That was my fault though, because I used Bluebird from Dharma Trading Company. And I don't know if you guys have had any issues with this, but Bluebird just seems to overtake everything that you put it close to. So here's a picture of it close up and you can kind of see the Bluebird just crept over into that second layer of petals and just pretty much consumed it. So you can still tell that it's a sunflower, but I don't have the second row of petals the way I wanted to. And I'm a little disappointed with that. I tried to not use a whole lot of Bluebird or oversaturate that area because I didn't want it to overtake the yellow portion, but obviously that didn't work. Anyway, I do think that the blue portion on the dress is pretty. There's a whole lot of color variation in the blues, and I do have some defined sinew lines. So I think that part of the dress looks very interesting. And I think it looks really pretty. Honestly, I think the dress would have looked really pretty if I would have just left the flower off and done the dress totally blue. But I wanted to try or experiment to see if I could put any kind of a hemostat mandala on one of these dresses. And it did work out. I just had a poor color choice. But honestly, even though the sunflower is not perfect, I still think it's a pretty dress. And I do think you can tell that it is a sunflower. What do you guys think? Drop me some comments down below and let me know. And if you've enjoyed watching me experiment making this dress and seeing if I could do this, I sure would appreciate it if you would like the video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day.